Welcome to the Philosophemes channel. In this episode, we discuss Aristotle's four causes. All right, so there are many videos on the internet on YouTube in regard to Aristotle's four causes. However, I thought that I had a little bit to add to the presentation of Aristotle's four causes, and so I wanted to go ahead and put together a short episode on the four causes. So here we go. All right. So some notes on Aristotle. To contextualize the conversation, I think it's important to keep these things in mind. The four causes in Plato, and of course, Aristotle's four causes do originate in Plato. Then we're going to look at the four causes in Aristotle and the role of the four causes in signification and definition, real definition and nominal definition, and then lastly, teleology, or the priority of the final cause. Okay. Aristotle is often referred to as the master of those who know. And I got to tell you, it was a pretty steep climb to get to a place from which I felt as though, okay, I understand Aristotle. And in fact, I don't know that I fully understood Aristotle until after I had graduated with my PhD. And that's because in teaching Aristotle, I encountered some perplexities that I had to, go out and re-research Aristotle in order to figure out the solution to those perplexities and how to communicate the solution to those perplexities. So there really was a sense in which, though I was versed in Aristotle, I couldn't claim to fully understand Aristotle until actually after I got my PhD. I feel like Aristotle is one of the most difficult philosophers to understand, and for reasons that are different than the contemporary, for example, French philosophers. So, but without spending any more time on that, I just want to say that this nickname, so to speak, the master of those who know, that it really is meaningful. I feel as though once you comprehend Aristotle's philosophy, there really is a sense in which you suddenly can just see in a way that you could not see before. And that way of seeing is very powerful. The ability to look at an event, the ability to look at a piece of knowledge and be able to examine it and be able to criticize it, those types of powers, Aristotle can provide you with those powers. All right, and at a very deep level. So there's my ode to Aristotle. All right. So again, he got to study with Plato for 2 decades. Just amazing. And after Plato's death, of course, as the story goes, Plato's nephew Speusippus was named head of the academy. And so this prompted Aristotle to leave the academy. Some other points of note: that he was a tutor to Alexander the Great from age 13 to 18, when Alexander was 13 to 18. And Aristotle founded his own school known as the Lyceum. He lectured while walking, so he and his students and his school, they are known as peripatetic. And then lastly, and this is the one big strike against Aristotle, in my opinion. But I wonder about this. from a psychoanalytic perspective, but in either case, their point of view. So after Alexander's death, Aristotle was charged with impiety. So essentially they were treating Aristotle exactly as they had treated Socrates. And, basically trying to get rid of him for political reasons, despite the fact that he's Aristotle. So Aristotle leaves Athens and famously says, so that the Athenians might not sin against philosophy twice. However, so in other words, when presented with the dilemma, do you want exile from Athens or do you want execution? The same dilemma, the exile or execution dilemma that they presented to Socrates, whereas Socrates accepted or chose execution, Aristotle chose exile. And Aristotle only lived for 1 year in exile. He died 1 year later. And I've often thought about this, and I've wondered if he, especially on his deathbed, if he didn't think to himself he should have chose execution. All right, so here we go. The four causes in Plato, and this comes from Plato's Timaeus. The god wanted everything to be good and nothing to be bad so far as that was possible. And so he took over all that was visible. So, of course, I'm thinking Leibniz here in the best of all possible worlds. And so he took over all that was visible, not at rest, but in discordant and disorderly motion, and brought it from a state of disorder to one of order, because he believed that order was in every way better than disorder. So if we look at this passage, this Plato's passage from the Timaeus here, notice you can already identify the four causes. So the first one, disorderly material, and then the force of the god's will or desire, the form of orderliness, and lastly, the god wanted to put the material into an orderly form for the purpose of making it all good. So you can see the material cause, the efficient cause, the formal cause, and the final cause. So they're already all there in Plato. All right. So here we go then, looking at them in Aristotle. And I do think that it is fair to say that you get a more scientific formulation of the four causes in Aristotle. It's also worth pointing out, so there's two things that's worth pointing out here. On the one hand, we could refer to the four causes in Aristotle as the four B causes, and I think that that does add some value. So it's worth mentioning that. And then also, there's a whole nother rabbit hole that we could go down in regard to the difference between reason and cause. Again, this would bring to mind Leibniz, but for now and for the purposes of what we're doing here, I had decided ultimately to not go down that rabbit hole because it would turn this episode into a seminar, and I really just wanted to put together an episode regarding Aristotle's four causes. So here are the four causes in Aristotle. The material cause, and the material cause responds to the question, what is the thing made of? So that out of which a thing comes to be and which persists, for example, bronze, silver, and the genus of these metal. The formal cause, and the formal cause responds to the question, what is the thing's essence or its form? So the statement of essence, the account of what it is to be, and the parts of the account. I'm going to round all this out at the end. So that's the material and the formal cause. And of the four causes, the material and the formal cause, they are known as intrinsic causes. So there's a sort of internal organization to the four causes here. All right. So in regard to the last of the four causes, the efficient cause and the final cause, these are then known as extrinsic causes. So the efficient cause responds to the question, who or what put the material into that form? Who produced the thing? So this is the primary source of change. And in the example, for example, of the thinker here, we could say that the sculptor, or in the example of a child, we could say that the parents of that child, that they are the primary source of the change that brings the being into being. And so therefore, we could refer to them as the efficient cause. And lastly, the final cause responds to the question, for what purpose was it produced, or simply why? And here, of course, the word being used is telos in Greek, or bringing to mind this idea of teleology, right? So this will come up other places, I'm certain, but in either case, the end, or the telos, that for the sake of which a thing is done. For example, something could be made for decoration. Something could be done or made for health. And these reasons, or these answers to the question why, would be the final cause of whatever it is that we're talking about, the activity or the creation. All right. Now, I am pulling some of this from Aquinas, but it's very helpful, and so I thought we would bring this in. So the idea here is, the guiding question is, what is signification? And this is on the relations between words, concepts, and things. And I'm not, this is not a seminar, so I'm not going to really fully explicate this here. However, just this idea of thinking about words, concepts, and things, we could say something like body, speech, and mind. For example, if you reorganize them into things, words, and concepts, but very, very powerful categories to be thinking with. All right, so as noted by Thomas Aquinas, here's a quote from the Summa: since, according to Aristotle, words are signs of ideas, and ideas likenesses of things, evidently words refer to things signified through the medium of an intellectual conception. In this way, formal cause refers to the form or the archetype, that is, the statement of the essence and its genre, are called causes, and the parts of the definition. So we're going to see this here in a moment, how the four causes refer to definition. But we got to round out and make sure that we include this idea of what is signification. Since the concept human belongs to the genus animal, the rational animal, with its specific difference from others of the genus being rational, right? Other animals are not rational. The definition of human would be rational animal. This states the essence of the being, then, that is human. So we'll see this here in a second, but I just wanted to point out that I'm getting this from Thomas Aquinas, and he's, of course, discussing Aristotle. And, of course, Aristotle got it from Plato. So we can talk about different types of definition, and here we have real versus nominal definition. So when you look at, we can say, what is a nominal definition? And so nominal definitions are etymological definitions and synonymous definitions. And a real definition then would be defining a thing in terms of its four causes. So I think this is quite valuable to take into consideration, especially in regard to the four causes. And I haven't seen any presentation on the four causes on YouTube that includes this information. Then we can take real definition and we can divide it, right? So this, of course, brings to mind the distinction that we saw earlier when we were thinking about the thinker and we were looking at intrinsic versus extrinsic. So here you see that real definition, which on the previous slide we just saw involves the four causes. There is essential and non-essential real definition. And the essential real definition is definition in terms of intrinsic causes. The intrinsic causes, of course, are form and matter, or the formal and the material causes. Non-essential definition or non-essential real definition is in terms of the extrinsic causes, the final non-essential real definition is in terms of the extrinsic causes, the final cause and the efficient cause, and non-essential real definition is in terms of the properties of the being. So it is possible to use the properties of the being to define it, but it is a non-essential real definition. Again, the implications for what we're looking at right here are just tremendous and extremely vast. So it's just not possible to consider all of the implications here. But I will mention that analytic philosophy really likes to emphasize the idea of definition by way of properties. And as we can see here by way of Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle and Plato, but especially Aristotle and Aquinas, this idea that definition by way of properties is a non-essential definition. So again, there are lots of implications here, but too much to include in just one episode. Okay, so lastly then, to round this out, let's consider teleology, or the final cause. And I think that this is really really important to consider, and that's why, again, other presentations don't seem to include this information. I thought you really should know this information. So telos, of course, refers to purpose or purposiveness. And in multiple works, Aristotle speaks as if the final cause is primary in relation to the other causes. So we want to try to understand that, right? The final cause refers to the why, or to the purpose. Aristotle likes the example of building a house. And of course, this appears in the Metaphysics. If you are going to build a house, you need materials. You need to put those materials into a form in which people can dwell. And you need the labor to assemble the material into that form. Notice how these three causes can differ, right? So we just stated the four causes in regard to building a house. But now we want to think about how these three causes, the material, the formal, and labor, of course, is the efficient cause. So how is it that these three causes can differ? So you can use different materials, right? Your house can be built out of a number of different materials. You can put the materials into very different looking structures, right? I mean, again, obvious, you can put together a dome house, for example, if you like. And you may have many options for who can build the house. So all of these causes can differ. However, the purpose for putting the materials into a form remains constant. So I think that's very important, and you can also, by way of that little exercise or examination there, you can see why it is that Aristotle seems to think that the primary cause can be understood as, that the final cause can be understood as primary, because the final cause determines, right? The final cause determines the material, formal, and efficient cause in a way such that any of those causes can change, but the being from the point of view of the final cause remains the same. And I think that this is also very important. My students liked to give me, as far as gifts go, I think the number one gift that I was given was the book, A Purpose-Driven Life. And I'm grateful for any gift that I am given, though we could talk about the philosophy of the gift in Nietzsche and Derrida, for example. But I'm thankful I'm thankful for everything. But this idea of a purpose-driven life, that the materials in the life can differ, the form and the exertion in relation to these materials and forms can differ, but the purpose can drive the entire life. I think that's valuable. Thank you.